Hey, what's going on, everybody? We're going to pick up right where we left off last week. We got a decent day out there today, so we're going to start putting some paint on these parts that we finished last week and didn't get a chance to paint. So let's get to it. Okay, man, we got some parts shot with our little $10 aerosol sprayer. It turned out pretty good. Tell you what, for just a little aerosol can, it lays out pretty good, I think. What I think we're going to do after we get a few more of these parts painted is we're going to go out, still haven't got the bearing cap yet, but we're going to throw the old oil pan on there. And we're going to put this engine in so we can at least get these motor mounts mounted in the chassis where they belong. The motor's got to come back out anyway, so it doesn't really matter if we have the cap or not. So let's get to painting some more of this stuff, and then we'll get out in the garage and we'll get that motor on a hoist and get it back in. All right, we got our engine on the hoist. All we got to do is get the flex plate back on and we can see if we can make this thing fit. All right, so we got the engine back out of the truck, back on the engine stand. We had to take it out anyway because we still haven't gotten the bearing end cap that needs to be replaced. The whole reason for putting that in there is to see if those motor mounts were going to work. Now that we know that they probably will not unless we change our transmission tunnel or put one in, as it were. Getting the trans where it needs to be and then building a floor back in around it. We could do that. And in the meanwhile, we got our speedometer. Okay. We got the parts painted that we wanted to paint, and we can reinstall those. But we can get the dash together, so we're going to do that. We're going to get this dash wired in, get everything set, get it in place. That way the majority of this wiring will be done inside the cab. All right, so we got our gauge panel in the workshop on the bench. Oh, she's looking pretty spanky. The reason why, because there are so many wires to connect to the panel lighting, we're going to twist these together and throw a bead of solder on them just so they all have a good strong connection. So let's do that. Okay, we got our wires all tied together. When we go to install it into the dash wiring, we'll put this heat shrink tubing over that to cover anything that might want to try to short out on us. That's pretty much it for that, other than I forgot to mention there is a wire for the fuel sending unit. which goes on to the gas gauge, obviously. All right, so we're closely reaching the halfway point of this build. I believe that once this engine is back in for good, we'll be at the halfway point. I don't know if we ever really discussed budget, but I'll give you a little backstory on how I acquired this truck. This was a deal that I got through the Comet. I got some cash and the Comet for the 58 Apache. So after we put our stank on the 66 Comet, I had figured I probably had, I don't know, like $2,000 in the Comet, outside of buying it, of course, or what it was worth that I traded for. So I figured the car was probably worth about $8,000, but anything is only worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. So I know that sounds kind of weird, but you know, you could ask $50,000 for the car, and if somebody gave you 50, well, then it's worth 50, right? Realistically speaking, the amount of money that was in the car, that I had in the car, I figured about $8,000. So I actually traded the Comet for this 46. Now this truck needed a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but I see the value in the truck when it's finished. It was running and driving when I got it, although not that great. Did need a ton of work. So budget, I figured I was going to probably, after I looked the truck over, I was going to probably have to put about $3,000 into it. And with what we've bought so far, for the motor, the bearings, the gaskets, you know, I bought a new oil pan. We're going to reuse the distributor, reuse the intake. They had valve covers. I bought a new air cleaner, a new oil fill tube, stuff like that, just to spruce the outside up a little bit. The interior, we had to buy a new bezel, obviously, all new gauges, new wiring. The steering column I actually had left over from another project, actually the Apache. I never put it in there. I was going to put it in there, but I never did. So I guess that has to come out of this budget too. It was purchased. The paint, the only unnecessary buy that I have done so far, I believe, are a set of headers. We could have reused the manifolds that we have. They're not cracked or anything. But Speedway had a great deal on these block hugger headers. I'm not even sure they're going to fit yet, but I did buy them. So having said all of that, we're at $3,250 right now. And I do believe, barring any other incidences that go wrong, we're reusing the starter, reusing the original power steering pump. The only other purchase I'd like to make is a one-wire alternator, just to simplify things. But other than that, and a new set of glass, I think that we're pretty much done spending. So I'm thinking that this truck is probably going to come in at about $4,000 at the end. I'm hoping that's going to be the end of it. And a whole lot of sweat equity, of course. But I think we're going to have a great truck at the end of this, and I think she's probably going to be worth, I'm going to put a price of probably $20,000. I would say that I could probably get somebody to pay for this truck. Not that I'm going to sell it. I'm just saying that the value that I think it'll be worth is probably around $20,000. So that's where we are with this build. We're going to keep on keeping on, and let's get back to work, man. All right, we got our painted parts back in the truck, our dome light and our ashtray cover. Let's go ahead and install our blinker light housings on top of our headlight housings and see how they turned out. I bet they look great. Okay, we got our housings put together. They look pretty darn good, if I do say so myself. Let's go ahead, just for the heck of it, mock up the headlights and the headlight bezels, see what they look like all together. I'm curious. I want to see. Okay guys, we got our headlights in, we got our new beauty rings on. Looking pretty spanky. I really like that blue. She's sparkling. Oh yeah, she is sparkling. Alright, so we're slowly seeing our pieces come together. Alright, so we got our dash bezel back here on the bench. I just got these in the mail. They are little LED lights that we're going to use for blinkers, and one for the high beam. They're the blue LEDs. I went ahead and installed the 3 that are in there. They did not fit. These housings were too large, and I really didn't want to drill out this bezel, so I just removed the casing from it. I think they're going to work out pretty good for blinkers. And the high beam indicator. So we did get our copper line, so we're going to go ahead and flare this and put it on. Alright, so we got our oil line on. That's for the water temp gauge. We got all of our lighting wire tied together, our grounds tied together. We got our blinker lights in, high beam indicator in. This thing's ready to be installed. Alrighty, so we've got all of the components installed in our dash bezel, ready to be wired up. And these are the wires for that. I know this is the fuel sending unit. Some of these are blinker lights, high beam indicator, whatnot. So basically all it is now is just matching the wires up, making sure they got a good connection, heat shrink them, and we can get our dash in here. Only wires left. These are for our steering column here. Our dimmer switch here. This is our heater, blower motor. These are for the brakes, brake light. And that's pretty much it. It'll wrap up the inside of the dash, so we can move on to getting this motor in, finalizing these motor mounts. But first we got to take our floors out. They got to be modified to accommodate the transmission. It's got to be raised about 1.5 inches, 2 inches. So it shouldn't be too bad of a project. Then we can get this motor in for good, these motor mounts in for good, and move on, man. There she is, she's in. All we have to do is run our oil line through and our oil temp gauge line through the firewall, and it's good to go, man. Okay, so this dash panel is all set in place. Just want to show you guys real quick what wires were left over. One is for a tachometer, which we're not going to use. One is for an oil sending idiot light, we're not going to use. One is for temperature idiot light, which we're not using. And the last one is a reverse light, which we will use. We don't have anything in place for it yet, but we will be using it. And these, of course, are our heater, blower motor wires. So the only thing we have left under the dash here are our wires for the column, our dimmer switch, what we're going to put in, and our brake light. Everything else is tied in. Those are the wires for our radio. We'll deal with that later. All right, went ahead and got our dimmer switch in. Pretty simple, really nothing to show. There's 3 wires, and it just plugged in. That's pretty much it. Okay, so we're out here back at it again today. This morning I put the brake light switch in. There really wasn't much to video, just put the bracket on, put the switch in place, and 2 wires that hook it up. That's it. So all the wires we have left are the radio wires here and our column wires here. So we're going to go ahead and get this column installed, get our wires spliced in, and that'll pretty much wrap it up here inside the cab. Okay, so this is the floor mount for the column. It's got 4 holes. We're going to mount it right here, secure it, and then we can clamp our base of our column in there. And then again up here, these holes don't exactly line up with the support we have, so we're going to have to drill one side of this out to secure it up here. I think we got her in approximately where she needs to be. We just have to secure it there at the floor. This bracket is adjustable to some degree here. But I think the angle's right on that. I think that's going to work out all right for us. So I'm going to go ahead and drill this in, and then we'll start splicing these wires together, and we'll get this column finished. All right, guys, our column is set, secured in place. You can see our brake pedal worked out really well. And we have room for our accelerator right here where it should be, not way over here where it was. Our next step is going to be to wire this column in. We're going to cut and splice because I couldn't find the right connector to adapt to the one that they have on there. So we're just going to use the single wire connectors, and I'll heat shrink it and all that. So it'll be good. It's not going to be an issue. Once the motor is in for good, we can put the top end back on it. Then we can start figuring the clearances for our steering, get our new brake lines on, and starting to button up this firewall. Basically all we got to do is just match up the colors. That's how easy that's going to be. We're just going to go ahead and cut these off here and use the individual wire splicers to splice this all back together. Let me do that and then we'll be back. Alright, I just wanted to show you guys what I've opted to do here because there's a slight discrepancy. All the wires match up except for this gray one. The gray wire, I'm assuming they have the left turn and the right turn from painless is dark blue, light blue. There is not a light blue in this, but I'm assuming the gray represents the light blue. And then just in case we're wrong, I'm going to use these plug-in connectors so we can easily unplug and replug it into the right spot in case that's the wrong spot. But I just wanted to show you guys that that's the only, I'm quite sure that that's what it is. This is right turn, this is left turn, and theirs are marked right turn, left turn, but it's dark blue, light blue. So we're going to go ahead and do the removable connectors as opposed to the permanent ones, and then we'll just heat shrink over the whole thing after we know everything's working. I just wanted to show you that. Check that out, guys. Well, she's looking like she's ready for the boulevard already. Oh yeah. She is a tilt wheel. Make it a little more comfortable. I'll tell you what, if you're a big guy, I don't know if you're going to fit in this thing. This cab is really small. Got all the wiring done in the dash except for the radio. We have our stub outs for our oil pressure and our water temperature. I think it's turning out pretty good. I think what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and take all the screws out of the floors, just loosen them up. We'll get our engine in. We'll get it mated to the transmission where it needs to be. It'll show us exactly how much this floor needs to be raised above this transmission. Okay, our next step is going to be to put the bottom end of this engine together, set the engine in, mate it with the transmission, make sure we got it exactly where we want it. Then we're going to tack weld those mounts in place. We'll take the engine back out. We'll finish either welding them in place or bolting them in place, whichever at this point is going to be easier. And I'm thinking maybe bolting them in. So maybe welding and bolting, I don't know. We'll see, but we'll get them in anyway. Let's get to doing that. Okay, guys, we got her in place. Made it back together all the way around. Pretty good. The bolt holes line up. So what we're going to do now is mark out these motor mounts where they need to be. We're either going to bolt them in or weld them in, one or the other, whichever's easier. We'll find out. Alright guys, we got a whole lot of wiring done this week. We got pretty much the entire cab wired up, our dash wired up, got our column in, wired up. We got our engine back in. We got our motor mounts marked exactly where they need to be. Next week we'll pull the engine back out and put those in permanently, and we'll be building on the top end of this engine, getting it all back together. We've reached the halfway mark in our build. There's still quite a bit to do. Like I said before, we had to take the floor pans out, so we're going to have to make some new floor pans or modify the ones that we have. Probably be easier. We still have a lot of body work to do. We've got fenders to do, running boards to do, doors to do. So there's a lot to do. But getting this motor back in and put back together was probably the biggest chore. We will be back at it again next week. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you next year, 2024. Take it easy, man.